Now, after the Maidan revolution 2 years ago and the mass killings of innocent protesters and the sniper killings of the Nebesna Sotnya, the Heavenly Hundred as they're known, the nation understood Russia's intentions to annex Ukraine. And the people united in their rejection of Russia, and they were willing to fight for their independence. This was quite a surprise and unexpected to Putin. When Russia invaded and occupied Crimea and then Donetsk region with their little green men and Chechen fighters, with local terrorists and Russian military personnel, and when they attacked and killed innocent civilians, we understood that the struggles of 100 years ago are closely connected to our own times. And the Kremlin's policies remained the same. Their methods did not change. Terror, violence, disinformation, invasion, subjugation continue to be their method of operation. Let me tell you, and someday you may remember these words, Crimea and the occupied territory of Donbas will return to Ukrainian control. Of that I am sure. And we support the struggle of the Crimean Tatar people for their land. I had the privilege of meeting their leaders in Kyiv, and my heart is with them, and they know that the Ukrainian people are with them. They are Ukrainian citizens and also fighting the Russian invaders of their land. Allow me to put some perspective on the current defense of Ukrainian territory. The video that we'll show illustrates the trajectory. I will not speak of the economic and political pressure on Ukraine. That is the topic of another presentation. But let me just make sure that we understand that 93% of the territory of Ukraine is not in a state of war. There is stress, but people are living normal lives. The restaurants are open, the theaters are open. You would never guess that there is a war going on if you would be in Kyiv or in Lviv or even in Kharkiv. And this presentation focuses, however, on the Donbas, where Russia invaded Ukraine's territory. When the Soviet Union imploded in 1991 and 92% of Ukraine's population voted for independence, regardless of ethnic origin, the people chose democracy as their form of government, regardless of language and ethnic origin. When elections were rigged in 2004, the people rose up in the Orange Revolution. After the disappointment of the next years in the corrupt dictatorship of Yanukovych, who wanted to bring Ukraine into Russia's orbit again, in 2014, the people rose up again to demand their rights in the Maidan Revolution. But Yanukovych and his allies from Moscow responded with bloody force, killing hundreds of innocent protesters. After Yanukovych escaped, on the last day of the Sochi Olympics, on February 23, 2014, almost 2 years ago, an enraged Putin invaded and occupied Crimea in violation of all international laws. It was the start of a new era, one of violence, war, and invasion of Ukraine, and also a challenge to the world community and the United States. Under the cover of little green men and so-called separatists, Russian-backed terrorists, and Russian military personnel, Donbas was invaded. Let me just explain, I didn't quite understand it myself until I went there, that Donbas is the area that covers both Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, the provinces. And since that time, Russia occupied approximately 7% of Ukraine's territory in the east. But Putin had plans to occupy 40% of Ukraine's territory, including Kharkiv in the north and all the way south to Mariupol. As you will see on the map, he had plans for quite a bit more than where they are now. He did not succeed, and despite the destruction of Ukraine's military by the previous governments, within months, Ukraine built up its military potential, and the people of Ukraine and its defense forces united against Russia. The Western world was shocked and unprepared for this type of challenge to the world order, and surprised by the tenacity of Putin and the tenacity of Ukrainians to fight and to give their lives for their country. Everyone was surprised by that. We were too. To his surprise, Putin's policy and military aggression backfired in Ukraine. The people united and showed tremendous courage to fight back the aggression. Now came the turning point. Donetsk airport became a central strategic point in the war. This is how the airport looked before the war. Without help from the West, Ukrainian soldiers, both volunteers and regular army forces, fought back Russian forces at the Donetsk airport for 240 days. They were supplied with weapons and soldiers from two towns just 1 kilometer and 2 kilometers away, the towns called Piske and Avdiivka. Now, as we speak, and since January 1st of this year, the town of Piske is being shelled again. As a matter of fact, when the big powers are talking about peace and another agreement, there have been 28 Ukrainian soldiers killed since the 1st of January and many more Russians. The minute they talk about peace, Russia accelerates their aggression. The Ukrainian fighters defending Donetsk airport became legendary. It is the Russians who first called the Ukrainian soldiers defending the airport kiborhe. Kiborhe are cyborgs. The meaning of that word means superhuman, and indeed they were. The kiborhe are the heroes of our time, and they will live on as heroes throughout Ukraine's history. This is what's left of the airport now. These Ukrainian kiborhe eventually retreated on orders from Kyiv because Ukraine's government wanted to save lives. But the legend of the defenders of Ukraine who defied the Kremlin and inspired the nation lives on. The Battle of Donetsk was the turning point of the war. The airport has been totally destroyed, and it cannot serve Ukrainian purposes, but it cannot serve Russian purposes either. Despite the order to retreat, the battle turned the tide in favor of Ukraine and stopped Russia's further advances. After centuries of defeat and infighting, occupation and genocide, this was the tale of Ukrainian military glory and unity. It united East and West. It united Ukrainians of all ethnic backgrounds. It provided an identity for the Ukrainian nation, and it rejected the idea once and for all of any union with Russia. From this battle on, Ukrainian fighters steadily took back much of the territory that had been occupied previously. This is the map of the occupied and the recaptured territories as of January 17th, just now, this year. This is where things stand now. If you'll, just to explain, to make sure you understand that this entire territory in colors was occupied by Russia. The Ukrainians were able to push them back and recover much of the territory. During the last week of October, I had the privilege to travel to the Donetsk Oblast, and I went with volunteers from Kharkiv who travel there every week to deliver humanitarian aid. We traveled through block posts, and in Ukrainian there's a new word called blokpost. The block posts where only volunteers with approved identities and volunteer cards are allowed to enter. I was lucky they took me with them. The soldiers who met with us were few, because the battalions of anywhere between 300 to 800 soldiers are hidden away, of course. At the present time, Ukraine's armed forces have been expanded to 250,000 people, including soldiers and officers, and it is the largest standing army in Europe right now, and they are all stationed along the border. We've got to give them credit, no matter how much we criticize the government. It is the tremendous effort of the government, that special word, the government, but they were able to mobilize such a large force. And with the help of the United States, the soldiers were able to be trained properly by officers from the United States as well. Now here is the road we took in Donbas. We started out in Kharkiv, but actually I started out in Kiev. And if you look at the map, Kiev would be located all the way at the end of the wall here. So we started in Kharkiv, and then came down Izium. It's not even on this map. And then Slovyansk. Slovyansk is right at the top, and very important town that was recaptured, and that's where the recapturing of territory began. Then Kramatorsk, Kostiantynivka, Krasnoarmysk, Selidove, Karlivka, Piski, Kurakhove, Volnovacha, Mariupol, Urzuf. I'm mentioning these names because these are the names of the towns that went through tremendous invasions and fighting. Fierce fighting had been taking place in Donbas. Homes and buildings were destroyed, forcing people to leave. There are close to 1.5 million internal refugees in Ukraine. There are many victims who died. There are many more injured and in need of serious medical help. There are still many, many people left in the entire Donbas territory trying to rebuild their lives. And we visited them in schools, in nursing homes for the elderly. We stopped at some of these towns that are being rebuilt. This war, which is being called a hybrid war, or a war that doesn't even exist, forced the Minsk agreement that was signed by Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France, obliging a ceasefire on February 15th of last year. But only 3 days later, the so-called separatists violated the agreement with heavy fighting around the town of Debaltsevo. Heavy losses were suffered there. But 5 months later, with a rebuilt military force in Ukraine, on the 4th of July of last year, a large-scale Ukrainian offensive recaptured Slovyansk, a strategic city of 100,000 people. And this was a major victory for Ukraine that turned around the struggle. And last year, Kyiv Mohyla Academy established a Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Rehabilitation in Slovyansk. And you can imagine how many people and soldiers are in need of emotional stress disorder rehabilitation. The Ukrainian military forced the Russian-led forces to retreat, and within a short time, they pushed the Russian terrorists to move further east. Cities such as Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, and Mariupol returned to Ukrainian control. And these are precisely the cities and towns we visited. We traveled from Kharkiv in 3 vans that were packed to the roof with supplies, food items, warm clothing, generators for electric power, vitamins, cold medicine, blankets, and winter sleeping bags, and many other items. The central place where all supplies are brought and then packed into vans is the Kharkiv Ukrainian Orthodox Autocephalous Church. And maybe you saw some of the items that were bought at Costco, and many of our Chicago local volunteers have been sending. I am grateful to the people of Kharkiv who took me to see the battalions. Serhiy Kuzan from Kharkiv, an extraordinary man who heads the network of volunteer groups in eastern Ukraine in an organization called Vilni Люди, which means free people. It's an organization that's an umbrella organization because there are many, many, many volunteer groups all over the east of Ukraine. We think of Ukraine always as Kyiv and Western Ukraine, but we forget that the heart of Ukraine really to a great extent is Kharkiv, and if Ukraine is going to remain free, we need the east of Ukraine to be loyal, and they certainly are. Olha Riznichenko, who works with other volunteers, leads a group called Dobrochinets, which means that he who does good deeds. Olha is a writer and poet and lecturer of the Ukrainian literature at Kharkiv National University and is one of the pro-Ukrainian leaders of civil society in Kharkiv, a city whose mayor, whose name is Kernes, is pro-Russian and has his own militia. So you can imagine what a hard time these people are having when the mayor has his own militia and he is pro-Russian. That's something we need to pay attention to. A group also included Father Otets Volodymyr Chervonnikov, who has a parish in Kanyev and travels to the battalions continuously. Also Vadim Prichodchenko, who is a businessman and key member of the church, and historian Volodymyr Vyatrovich, whom you know. We were also joined by a well-known actor from the famous Kharkiv theater, a singer and guitarist, a young woman from Lviv who brought hundreds and hundreds of books to the soldiers, and of course volunteers who helped with driving and everything. We traveled through the black soil known as the Chornozem and the coal territories of Akhmetov and other oligarchs who exploit the mineral wealth of the land and exploit the workers in the coal mines. In 25 years of independence, these obscenely wealthy oligarchs did not do anything to improve living conditions of the population. I was filled with pride when I witnessed the motivation and professionalism of the battalions. And there are women in the battalions too. The majority of doctors and nurses with the battalions are women. I also saw some women, young women soldiers, who fight along with the men. These people and the dedication of the volunteers from all the cities and towns assure the defense and victory of Ukraine.